I've been combing through an incredible 168 pages of text messages and other pieces of evidence that have been presented by Justin Baldoni in his ongoing legal battle against Blake Lively. As many of you might already know, this whole ordeal started with Blake Lively filing a lawsuit against Justin, demanding a large sum of money, only for Justin to counter with a staggering $400 million claim. To make things even more chaotic, the New York Times is also being dragged into this mess, with a hefty $250 million lawsuit in the mix. It doesn't stop there. Ryan Reynolds and even Taylor Swift are somehow entangled in this web of intrigue. The entire situation is absolutely wild. What I've uncovered in these new text messages is something truly shocking, a sense of betrayal so deep. It's almost palpable. Justin feels as if his words have been twisted beyond recognition, with a clear agenda to paint him as the aggressor rather than the victim. This is exactly the narrative that was initially spun in a New York Times article. And while I can't possibly go over every single claim and counterclaim made in these pages, it's clear that the timeline and evidence are stacking up against Blake. Blake has made some serious allegations, and while many of them seem to have a solid logical foundation, there's a twist. She's not just his co-star in a movie, but also his subordinate on set. Adding another layer of complexity is the fact that their on-screen chemistry leads to scenes involving intimate moments. As I go through these pages, it's important to understand the context. I'm about to share some of the key pieces of evidence with you, including text messages, notes, metadata, and call sheets. All of these are crucial elements that haven't been altered or tampered with. Now, let me set the stage. This is on page 155 of the document. And it's a real turning point in the case. Stick around, because you won't want to miss this. But before we dive into that, I want to take you through a fascinating moment captured during one of the film's most intimate scenes, specifically the slow dance and kiss between the two characters. Here's where things get truly bizarre. On the shoot day of May 23rd, the call sheet, which is essentially the roadmap for everyone involved in the production, outlines the sequence of events, listing crew and cast call times. This document is highly detailed, even down to the weather on set and the locations being used. For context, in this particular scene, we see the characters played by Blake and Justin locked in a moment of passionate connection at a bar, a slow dance followed by a kiss. It's an intimate scene, but it's crucial to understand that the kiss itself wasn't improvised, as some have claimed. There's clear evidence in the script and from the intimacy coordinator that every action, every touch, was prearranged, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Blake later accused Justin of crossing the line by discreetly biting and sucking her lower lip during the scene. But the reality, according to the script and the documented call sheets, paints a very different picture. It was never improvised, it was all part of the scene, carefully planned and coordinated to maintain the integrity of the production. The actual claims made against Justin, suggesting he was overly aggressive in these intimate moments, have no basis in the planned choreography of the shoot. But let's not stop there. In this same set of text messages and evidence, there's a more troubling claim that Blake mischaracterized a video of a home birth, a water birth, to be specific, as something vulgar and perverse. In reality, it was simply a video of a newborn baby entering the world. An intimate and personal moment that was not meant for anything inappropriate. Justin had shown it to her not for any sinister reason but because he wanted to share something meaningful. Not for the kind of on-set debauchery Blake suggested. The tone on set was professional, and such a depiction was intended to reflect the authenticity of life, not some twisted agenda. As this case continues to unfold, the layers of miscommunication, misunderstanding, and outright manipulation become clearer with every new piece of evidence. The courtroom will ultimately be the final place where the truth is revealed. And this collection of messages, call sheets, and metadata will be crucial in telling the real story. Let's turn to the next page, shall we? The scene unfolds at a bar, where patrons sip their drinks, laughing and watching sports, completely unaware of the intimate world unfolding in front of them. Blake and Justin's characters, completely lost in the moment, begin a slow dance, wrapped up in each other, as if no one else existed. This moment was shared publicly last week, and what it reveals is something truly eye-opening. The footage of this scene, which was released on January 21, 2025, serves as a direct counter to the claims Blake made in her lawsuit. The video itself paints a starkly different picture of Justin's behavior than what Blake had so boldly suggested. Rather than showing him as a villain, the footage captures the two actors, in character, engaged in a heartfelt conversation about their marriages while still fully embodying their roles as a couple deeply in love. Blake had tried to make it seem as though Justin had stepped out of character, speaking about his personal life in the middle of an intimate scene while also performing some rather suggestive actions. She described him as invading her space, kissing her in ways that were beyond what the scene called for. But what the footage shows is the opposite. Yes, they were talking about their real lives, but it was done in character, blending the lines between the actors and their roles. The truth is, they weren't cheating on their spouses, as Blake's accusations implied. They were simply acting, as actors do. It's a tricky concept to grasp, but it's a common practice in film, especially in a montage scene like this, where emotion, connection, and authenticity are required. Now, I know this might seem a bit complicated, but let me explain. There's an undeniable awkwardness that comes with shooting intimate scenes, even for seasoned actors. Kissing in front of strangers while cameras roll, surrounded by crew members, can be a bizarre experience. I've been there, trust me. You find yourself making eye contact with the sound technician while trying to focus on your co-star. Sometimes, your kissing partner's breath smells like sushi, and the entire situation feels surreal. But this is the reality of making movies, and actors often talk their way through these uncomfortable moments to maintain professionalism and focus on the scene at hand. The slow dance in the bar, where patrons go about their business, oblivious to the couple in the spotlight, is a pivotal moment. As the scene continues, Blake's complaint hinges on the fact that the script doesn't explicitly state that the characters would kiss during this montage. But let's think about this. Is it really an issue? The scene is about a romantic connection, and if kissing had already been established between the characters in earlier moments, then it's hardly surprising that they would share another kiss here. Perhaps Blake's argument hinges on whether she was aware of the kiss in this specific scene. But ultimately, this is a matter of perspective, and a gray area at best. Moving forward, let's turn to page 136, where things take a darker turn. This is where the real intrigue begins, with conversations involving the powerful William Morris Endeavor, WME, agency, Ryan Reynolds, and Blake Lively. As the PR storm swirls, it becomes clear that Blake and Ryan are furious with Wayfair and Justin Baldoni for how they positioned the film, particularly for elevating Justin to speak about its more serious themes while downplaying the romantic side of things. The couple is reportedly blaming Justin for how the film was marketed, demanding that Wayfair issue a public statement of apology. This is when things get particularly messy. Blake, still feeling the heat from the fallout, wants Justin to take responsibility for the backlash she's receiving, almost as if to shield herself from the fallout. But the situation grows more complicated by the minute. WME warns that if their demands aren't met, the gloves will come off. Ryan, apparently not one to back down, offers to personally draft a statement to be released by Wayfair, putting even more pressure on the situation. But here's where it gets interesting. Heath and Abel, key figures at WME, are shocked by Blake and Ryan's accusations. They firmly reject the notion that Wayfair or Nathan had anything to do with manipulating online narratives or spreading negative stories about Blake and Ryan. All the press surrounding the film, including the bad press, came from Blake's own marketing strategy. And it was all organic. There were no bots, no planted stories, it was the result of her own decisions. As the tension escalates, two high-level WME executives join a call to review the statements Blake and Ryan have drafted for Wayfair. Upon reviewing them, it becomes clear that these statements are vague and lack the substance needed to address the real issues. In fact, if they were intended to quell the negative attention surrounding Blake, they were likely to do the opposite, drawing even more scrutiny. Wayfair, Justin, and Heath firmly reject the demands, unwilling to take responsibility for problems that weren't of their making. The PR machine has spun wildly out of control. And now, there's no turning back. This situation is a cautionary tale of the dangers of miscommunication, ego, and the harsh reality of public perception. As things continue to unfold, it's clear that this is only the beginning of a much larger battle. The stakes are high, and everyone involved has a lot to lose. After the writers' strike, the only way Blake was coaxed back onto the set was through a calculated move, a forced acknowledgement of mistakes. Even though the signatures were signed under intense pressure, they essentially had to admit to something they didn't believe in, just to get her back. And now, Ryan Reynolds is pushing through his influence, through his powerful agency, WME, attempting to pressure Justin into signing what can only be described as a hostage-like statement. It's almost as if they were cornering him into a position he had no choice but to accept. On August 12, 2024, Ryan Reynolds wrote this statement, clearly shaped by his frustration with the public's response to Blake's role in the film. Fans were enraged by how the movie had been marketed. And in case you were unaware, it was Ryan's PR team that was responsible for the entire campaign. The marketing was full of shallow gestures, everything from floral themes to pushing alcohol brands, to promoting hair care lines. Fans weren't buying into the image they were trying to sell. And that's when things began to unravel. In their prepared statement, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, on behalf of Justin Baldoni, Heath, and Wayfair, wrote, "This was a troubled production, which we take full accountability for." With those words, they sought to pin the blame on everyone involved. Despite their own contributions to the chaos, they apologized to the public and expressed remorse for the discomfort caused, claiming that any negativity directed at them was theirs to bear. "We hold ourselves accountable," they continued, using Justin's own words against him, suggesting that part of being a man was owning up to mistakes, even those that were not their fault. But here's the kicker: Ryan Reynolds, the man known for his sharp wit and his calculated public persona, had a role in all this drama. He had been teasing Justin in the press, mocking him for his nice guy image. He made a joke about Justin's persona, claiming that he was so overly manufactured and sweet that it would be a relief when his head was blown clean off. An insinuation that was more than a little unsettling. It wasn't a direct threat, but the message was clear. And yet, in the same breath, Reynolds continued to push for the statement where he and Blake would hold themselves accountable. As if to say, "Look, we're learning, growing, and practicing what we preach." The irony was palpable. On one hand, Reynolds played the role of the well-meaning, accountable individual, urging for public growth. On the other, he was engaging in behavior that seemed more designed to manipulate and control the narrative than actually owning up to any missteps. The statement ended with the suggestion that the public and cast alike should thank them for their opportunity to be imperfect, as if they were doing everyone a favor by simply acknowledging their flaws. But the public wasn't fooled. They saw through the well-crafted PR stunt. Soon after, WME's PR team shared with Nathan that both Blake and Ryan were pushing Justin to release a statement. It came as a shock, even to them, that such a request was being made. Nathan, astounded by the audacity of the demand, advised Justin to seek legal counsel immediately. This is where things really hit a turning point. Legal advice was now coming from within the camp itself. His own colleagues, the very people he had worked with on set, were now pushing him into a corner. This was no longer just a dispute about creative differences or marketing strategies, it had turned into a full-blown career assassination attempt. The pressure on Justin was immense, and the stakes had never been higher. At that point, the only thing left to do was lawyer up. It was a fight for survival. A desperate struggle to protect one's professional reputation and personal integrity. As if preparing for a game-changing halftime speech. This moment became the pivot where Justin had to decide, was he going to back down and allow his image to be completely controlled? Or was he going to fight back? One thing was certain, this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle. You know, this situation is absolutely wild. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. The pressure is mounting, and now they're reaching out to hire a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, though, they need someone with real power. Brian Fredman, a litigator with a reputation for taking on the toughest cases, is the one they call to step in. This is the kind of lawyer you bring in when you're fighting a war. Fredman is known for being fearless, willing to take on even the biggest names in the industry. And here, he's coming to the rescue. The funny thing is, most people are too intimidated to go up against WME, one of the largest agencies out there. But Fredman? He's not afraid. He'll face down the giants and fight tooth and nail. So, the call goes out, and they get Fredman on the case. This is when things start to get real. We're diving into a massive stack of 1688 pages of evidence. And while I can't go through every single page today, I've got family in town, it's clear that there's more to this than meets the eye. In fact, if I were to read it all aloud, we'd be looking at a marathon 5-hour live stream, and that's just scratching the surface. But for those who want to dig in, I'll be posting a link to the full PDF in my Patreon. Trust me, it's a rabbit hole you'll want to explore. There are screen grabs after screen grabs, with the internet swirling with stories. The evidence clearly shows Justin Baldoni denying any involvement in planting these stories. As some might have suggested, they didn't plant them, they were just prepared to. But in the end, they didn't have to. Now, here's where things take a really interesting turn. According to these documents, Nathan finally tells Justin that Blake has seen the film in theaters. She messages him, sharing a touching note about how the movie moved her. Justin opens up, revealing the deeply personal story that inspired him to direct the film and option the book. But then, out of nowhere, Blake Lively raises a significant complaint. Her lawsuit against Justin accuses him of doing some truly troubling things during a car ride. She claims that he admitted to not always seeking consent before engaging in sex. A statement that could carry serious implications if proven true. This particular claim, which was made on Christmas Eve, is incredibly damaging to Justin's reputation. But the big question is, did he actually say it? According to the documents, during this car ride with Blake, her assistant, and the driver, Justin allegedly opened up about his past, revealing that he had experienced abuse in a previous relationship. He talked about how the trauma he endured made him rethink his actions and how he viewed consent in relationships. In an emotional admission, Justin allegedly said, "Did I always ask for consent? No. Did I always listen when they said no? No." The implication here is that he was reflecting on his past mistakes, using them as a way to show that everyone has room to learn and grow. Blake's lawsuit took this moment and twisted it, using it to accuse Justin of engaging in non-consensual behavior. She misrepresented the story, making it seem as though he had been the one to disregard consent in his actions with others. But the truth, according to Justin, was quite the opposite. What he was actually saying was that he had been the victim of a past relationship where he did not give consent. And that experience shaped the way he approached relationships in the future. Now, here's where things get even murkier. Blake claims that her driver and assistant were present during this conversation. But can we really trust them as credible witnesses? It's hard to say. After all, assistants can be tricky. Who's going to bite the hand that feeds them? But the driver? Maybe. Still, we can't rely solely on their accounts. In response to these accusations, Justin's response is telling. He explained that this was not an attempt to justify any past actions but rather an effort to understand how he could make the movie resonate authentically. He shared a deeply personal story about losing his virginity in a non-consensual way to an emotionally abusive girlfriend when he was young. He went on to say that he struggled with the trauma from that experience for years, questioning whether it had been his fault. It wasn't until he was older that he was able to process those memories and start to heal. This emotional revelation came out during his discussions with Blake. But ironically, it was this very story that Blake later used against him in her list of complaints. It's incredibly unfortunate that what Justin shared with her in confidence and vulnerability was later twisted to serve a different narrative. As he put it, "When I was 20, I lost my virginity to an emotionally abusive girlfriend in a non-consensual way. And it took me years to come to terms with it. When I was 35, I started remembering and trying to understand what happened and why. I wasn't sure whether it was my fault or if I wanted it. But those memories came back as I was working on the film." That's how the inspiration for the movie came about. The book didn't contain any of that. But when I told Blake, that was one of the things she used against me later. This entire situation has become a masterclass in manipulation and misrepresentation, with Justin caught in the crossfire of a narrative that's been carefully crafted to paint him as the villain. Whether or not these claims are true, the damage is already done, and it will be up to the legal team to fight for the truth to come out. Let's be crystal clear here. If I were Blake's attorney, the first question I'd be asking is, did you, or did you not, say these words, particularly the one where you admitted, "I didn't always ask for consent"? Now, I'm not entirely sure whether those words, if indeed spoken, would rise to the level of sexual harassment. It's a murky area, certainly a damaging look, but whether it qualifies as workplace harassment is still up for debate. But if that's all there is to it, if that's the only context, the only piece of this conversation, then it's far more sinister than one might initially think. It's one of those moments where the lines of right and wrong blur. And it's left to the court to decide whether the damage was intentional or simply a misunderstanding. It's rare to hear a man claim to be the victim of a consent issue. And I get why that might be so perplexing to many. After all, in most cases, the female is the one that is the victim. And that's a painful truth that no one can or should deny. I have nothing but compassion for those who have faced the trauma of such experiences. I had a call yesterday with someone who opened up to me about how deeply triggered they felt. How their emotions surfaced so suddenly. It's heavy, I know. It's raw. Their vulnerability was clear. And I wanted to acknowledge that. We often react this way because deep down, our nervous systems are flaring, confronting something unresolved. Something that either needs to be healed or buried forever. And as difficult as it may be, I truly believe healing lies in confronting these pains, in talking them through. Now, for Justin Baldoni, if this story about him is true, that he was the one who was taken advantage of, then we're looking at a man with a story that needs to be heard. A story of deep emotional scars. To think that Blake could take that painful, personal confession and twist it into an accusation against him, that's beyond shocking. If that's what happened, it would be a staggering betrayal. It's almost unfathomable. And yes, there might be more to that conversation. More layers that haven't yet been revealed. But from what we know from these text messages, this is what Justin had to say in response. He wasn't trying to justify anything, he was simply sharing his truth. However difficult it was to put into words. Blake, according to the texts, apologized. She said, "I'm really sorry that happened to you. As you get older, you learn different things. You see things in different ways. I understand where you're coming from." That was her response, one of acknowledgement. But then the story took a turn. She twisted the narrative, using this personal revelation to form part of her list of accusations. What's even more striking is that the documents show this wasn't just a casual exchange. It was a deeply personal moment of vulnerability, one that Justin had shared with Blake, hoping for understanding. Instead, it became a weapon used against him. Then we jump to the metadata, a whole new layer of evidence. This is where things get technical. And for those unfamiliar with how digital footprints work, it might not be immediately obvious how damning this is. On January 28, 2025, it was confirmed that Blake's complaint had been indexed by the New York Times domain as early as December 10, 2024. This is significant because it shows that the article, or at least parts of it, were prepared and circulating much earlier than anyone had realized. This raises more questions about who knew what and when. The timeline here is crucial. Blake's complaint wasn't just some spontaneous filing, it had been in the works for a while. And the articles linked to it were already being set up well before they went public. Thanks to some diligent work from a Twitter user and a TikTok creator. The connections between these digital timestamps and the content management system used by the New York Times were uncovered. They found that, in fact, these documents were timestamped much earlier than their public release. The implication here is that the smear campaign against Justin might have been in motion far longer than anyone thought. It's not just a matter of who leaked the story, it's about when it was being shaped and why. As the discovery unfolded, it was clear that there was more going on behind the scenes than anyone initially thought. The articles were crafted with care, and digital timestamps were showing that parts of them existed online, even before they officially hit the press. Some will argue that this is no big deal, that stories take time to develop, but when you're accusing someone of being part of a coordinated effort to discredit another, these early timestamps are extremely telling. Justin's side now has the evidence that something was amiss, and it will be up to experts to explain just why these timestamps are so damaging. But what's truly at stake here is not just the public image of these celebrities, it's the very trust that we, as an audience, place in the stories that are being told. Who are we going to believe? Who gets to define the narrative? And more importantly, who has the power to manipulate the story for their own ends? Right now, we're left with a situation that feels like the lowest form of backstabbing, the twisting of one person's pain to make them appear as the perpetrator rather than the victim. This situation is far from over, and there's a long way to go before the truth fully emerges. Whether Blake's accusations hold weight or not, one thing is clear: this is a case that will take time to unfold. And the truth will come to light eventually, one way or another.